I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Throws up with the head. Intercepted. 40. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And then the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Mr. Rhett Matthew of the Cannon Fire podcast. I can't believe that CSB is no longer so much great talent. I mean, yourself, Jay Retcher, a lot of people out there that went to that school, and I'm just happy that you're a part of it. You're CSB brother, and I'm happy that you're back on the evolution. What's going on, my friend? How you doing tonight?
Doing well, Sweet Pete. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Yeah, man.
How am I sounding? Am I coming in hot? Do I need to turn myself down here?
No, you're fine, man. You did good. You got the setup there. I didn't see this setup. Look at that. You got the Allstott the sign. I got the Allstott jersey in the background. I mean, good stuff there. We got comments. I'm going to open up the phone lines because I want Rhett to take some questions about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But let's start out with Jon Gruden. What were your thoughts on him being reinducted or put back in, if you will, the Ring of Honor? Welcome to the Sports Web.
Happy to see it. Happy to see it for obviously the head coach. And then I think for the Buccaneers organization to take a little bit of accountability and come out and just get out in front of it. Be like, listen, after some time of reflection, time has passed. We've had some time to think about it. Maybe indirectly they admitted that they had jumped the gun taking him out in the first place. But to see it officially acknowledged, to see him back in the Ring of Honor, just continuing to repair his reputation, I guess, around league circles. Now, people are obviously going to feel whichever way they feel about Jon Gruden at the end of the day, and that's totally fine. Everybody has their opinion, but I do not think that anyone can deny that he has really been making the most out of this TV tour he's had the last couple of years, just trying to mend fences, build relationships once again. And I know that he's sitting pretty nice right now with his Barstool contract, but something tells me and a lot of other people within the next 2, 3, 4 years, maybe even less time than that, I would not be shocked to see Jon Gruden coaching the game of football again. He's what we call a for-lifer. And I definitely don't think his coaching days are over, but I'm glad that things are headed in the right direction for him. He's a really good guy, and as far as the Tampa Bay area goes, very well respected around these parts. So happy to see him fix that relationship with the Buccaneers. They've been working on that for a while.
They have been working on that a while, Red, and it's a good thing to see because I definitely think he's a part of the history, whether you want to deny it or not. I get it. He made some comments, and you can't make comments about your boss. Did he do it to them? He did it in an email. Still not right. Still some of those. But, again, he's been forgiven. He's been, put back into the Ring of Honor. So I'm happy for him. Dave feels the same way. Gruden should have never been taken out of the Ring of Honor. Let's go out to Chris Godwin because this is a big-time question. Even a Packers fan here, Justin says, do you think the Packers should go after Chris Godwin and get him a couple years other than a rental player? Now, of course, you get a young quarterback like a Jordan Love. You want to get him as supposed number one wide receiver. Make no mistake about it, Rhett. Godwin would be a number one wide receiver if he wasn't in Tampa. Of course, they've got Mike Evans. How concerned are you about Godwin leaving the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and going to a team, especially with T. Higgins getting franchised today for that $26 million price tag?
It does feel hard to predict, but at the same time, I feel like year in and year out now, especially with Jason Light as general manager, the Buccaneers have found themselves in this position where you've got a couple of big name free agents that are going to be highly sought after from these other teams. And one way or another, they end up making things work. Now, they no longer have John Spytek in that front office. He takes the job with the Raiders. He was instrumental in a lot of the free agent deals the Bucs have been able to draw up for a lot of their guys these last several seasons, but they still have Mike Greenberg in the building. They still obviously have Jason Light, Jackie Davidson, and the rest of that front office who have been doing great work. So I don't know. It feels hard to predict solely because of where Godwin is in his career and what the Buccaneers are dealing with at wide receiver right now. I mean, Mike Evans is talking like a guy who's only going to play for 2 or 3 more years, realistically. Jalen McMillan has emerged, but you want to hope that he can continue to build off of that impressive second half of the rookie season. There were weeks where I think the Bucs were looking for him to step up. During the 2024 season where both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were missing action, and he didn't really step up. Finished the year explosive, had tons of touchdowns. Towards the end of the year, you couldn't get away from him in the end zone. He was that valuable of a target for Baker Mayfield, but you want to see him continue to, pick up the pace here. I feel like Chris Godwin is back in Tampa. I think, the Buccaneers moving that negotiation deadline a little bit further so they could, open up contract talks. They've been vocal. Jason Light has always been vocal about his guys wanting to bring them back and get a deal done. I think I heard, Ira say this a little bit earlier, and I'm going to agree with him here as well. I think in a weird way, the injury helps the Buccaneers in this situation. Godwin was off to a monster start last year. He was far and away the Buccaneers' most effective receiver through the first half of the season when he was on the field. He was playing at another level. And unfortunately, the injury happens. His season is cut short. And that's going to be a little bit of a red flag to some of these teams, especially when you look at the pay raise, the cap continuing to go up, what these receivers are getting paid now. If you are a team like the Packers, is that too much money to invest in a wide receiver who's just coming off of a season-ending injury? That's a tough question that you have to ask yourself as a general manager. I think Chris Godwin, though, as a player, has proved by this point in his career that he can bounce back from things like this. He is always a guy who is going to bet on himself, and I think it would be unwise to bet against him. His work ethic, is I think unmatched in a lot of ways. Jason Light said that there really aren't a lot of other guys in the building who show up and work as hard as Chris Godwin does. And when you consider all the things that he's had to overcome these last several seasons, the guy is made of steel. So I think the most likely scenario is Chris Godwin back in Tampa Bay. Jason Light always finds a way. And, my personal opinions on free agency, I'm sure we'll talk about it here in a couple of minutes, but I wouldn't necessarily be hurt if the Buccaneers were in a position to forego Chris Godwin and maybe take a look at a playmaker on the defensive side of the ball. But I've also never really known Jason Light to be that kind of guy. I don't think he's looking to get that aggressive with a pass rusher to where they're not at least going to try and make something work with Chris Godwin. So, again, it feels hard to predict all the way to the draft. There's a lot of things about the Buccaneers offseason that feels hard to predict, but I do know that Jason Light and this front office are going to make the best of it. And I think one of the ways they do that is by keeping Chris Godwin in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that because, again, it is a blessing in disguise. He was off to a monster season there with 5 touchdowns and 50 receptions and looking like a top receiver. And he goes about it professionally on and off the field. So I would expect him to be kept. I think they want to come to some type of agreement. I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it. I feel like the NFL salary cap is like the national debt. We're always talking about it, but yet you still find some money. The Saints for the last 5 to 10 years, they're always over the cap, but yet they still find a way. So if you want to keep a player, you're going to be able to keep a player. With that being said, what is your take on the Levante David situation? Because a lot of Bucs fans, you watch David, he's playing at a high level. He's 35 years old. He's playing like a 25-year-old sideline to sideline. Do you think he comes back? And does it depend on what the Bucs do in free agency? Like what Gerald McCoy had to say a couple of weeks ago at Radio Row. Let's say the Bucs go out and trade for a Myles Garrett or Trey Hendrickson or get a Josh Sweat. Does that convince Levante David to come back? Because listen, Rhett, that championship window is open. It's open for a couple of years. That's the San Francisco 49ers, which it certainly seems like the window is kind of closed on them with, possibly trading both wide receivers, not only Deebo Samuel to the Washington Commanders, but Brandon Ayuk. What do you say about that situation?
Man, with Levante David, again, going back to the Chris Godwin thing feels hard to predict, but I feel like this one is so much more important because on the defensive side of the ball, they just need so much more help. We just talked about how deep they are at the wide receiver position. Jalen McMillan really stepping up. Mike Evans clearly going to be the guy until he's not. And anybody else who can fit in between is just a stud playmaker, and that's all a bonus for the Bucs. On the defensive side of the ball is where they need some help. And as much as I love Levante David, one of the greatest Tampa Bay Buccaneers to ever put on the red and pewter, he will be in the Ring of Honor. He should be an NFL Hall of Famer. The Super Bowl hopefully solidified that. One of the most underrated players in the NFL for the last decade. He can be a contributor, and he can be a guy that the Buccaneers lean on at the linebacker position at 35 years old. The film last year will prove that. Yes, there are certain areas of his game that have slowed down, but he can still do it all. He can still do all the things that he's been doing for over a decade now on that Buccaneers defense, but he needs some help. Having a healthy defense, being able to field the same guys week in and week out is obviously going to go a long way for not only veterans like Levante David, but Todd Bowles. When you evaluate his defense at the end of the year, the healthiness of that roster is going to be a factor. And that was a big issue for the Buccaneers last year on the defensive side of the ball. Just could not shake the injury bug. But not only do they need to get Levante David some help, they need to start planning for life beyond Levante David. Servassier Dennis, getting him healthy, I think is going to be huge. And I think Bucs fans are going to have stronger opinions on him by the end of the 25 season than they ever have before, because I have a feeling next year you will probably see more of him than you ever have if he's able to stay healthy. I think that was the plan in 2024, unfortunately, and things just kind of fell off the wagon the way that they did. But that feels like a much more dire situation, because if Levante David decides to hang it up, you still haven't heard anything official yet. We are still a couple weeks away from the official start of free agency.
Yeah.
Expecting an answer somewhat soon. I mean, he doesn't necessarily have to give him one, but it certainly changes not only how they look at the draft, but free agency, the level of talent that they want to bring in. I don't know if you need another vet backer, but I would just like to see something better than you got now.
Well, I mean, KJ Britt's not the answer. I don't know. Deion Jones, maybe they bring him back. We've seen flashes of brilliance with him with Atlanta, but you kind of have the same linebacker. I think, Jones could be better in coverage than KJ Britt, most likely a better tackler than KJ Britt. In fact, I'd rather have Kenny Britt, who used to play wide receiver, play linebacker than KJ Britt for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So let's say the Bucs address edge, because we assume that's the biggest need, right? You assume that edge is the biggest need going into free agency in the draft. Let's say you address that with getting a Khalil Mack or Josh Sweat, which we'll get back to in a moment. Is linebacker, especially middle, that kid Campbell out of Alabama at 19, does that become the number one need? First, Sweat and Khalil Mack. What do you think of those options? And then linebacker for the draft.
I like Sweat a lot. Now, the Khalil Mack thing, he's 34 years old, and I know that it is guaranteed production when you look at the guy's track record, but he's still 34 years old. I think that for the price tag and for the way that Jason Light likes to do business, let's not forget, I think the last time Jason Light really went out on a limb and got super aggressive on the defensive side of the ball was that 2017 offseason, or I'm sorry, 2018 offseason. They traded for Jason Pierre-Paul. They signed Vinny Curry. They signed Bo Allen. They drafted Vita Vea, all to build up the trenches. And I feel like the defense has found itself in another situation like it was in that 2018 offseason. I feel like they are almost at an impasse, for lack of a better term. You've got these talented guys all over the place. You've got Kalijah Kancey really coming into his own in the interior defensive line, led the team in sacks from the interior defensive line spot as a second-year player. You've got Vita Vea right behind him, literally in the prime of his career, one of the most dominant nose tackles in the NFL. Every single team fears him week in and week out. You cannot lose where number 50 is on the field. You've got a generational talent in Levante David, who, again, isn't going to be playing forever. We don't know how much longer he's going to be here for Tampa Bay. You've got some playmakers. Antoine Winfield Jr. had a down year. He is still a damn good football player. He just had a bad season. Injuries caught up to him. rotating backfields, rotating lineups week in and week out. He was a victim of that as well. Todd Bowles talked about Tyke Smith potentially getting bumped up into that safety spot, taking over for Jordan Whitehead, who is now a free agent once again. So on the defensive side of the ball, it feels like the areas where they fall off, they really fall off. We need to have a discussion about this cornerback room. Jamel Dean, a lot of fans have opinions about him, but I still feel like higher up on the priority list is edge rusher number 1, like you said, and inside linebacker number 2. Now, when it comes to Khalil Mack, again, I think the Buccaneers need to make a significant move on the defensive side of the ball, specifically for an edge rusher. Now, I don't think it needs to be a Myles Garrett significant kind of move. I don't even think it needs to be a Khalil Mack significant kind of move because he is 34 years old. I don't think the Buccaneers would pony up the resources to make that kind of move, but I do think they need to just throw as much ammo at this as they possibly can. Again, Jason Licht has his way of doing business, so he's not going to go after the most sexy prospects. I know that it was reported, I think it was either Jenna Layden or Jordan Schultz who had got it out there first, that the Buccaneers are legitimately interested in Khalil Mack. And I'm sure that them, along with a list of 10 other teams, are interested in Khalil Mack. But I'm sure they also have their own list of guys that are a little more secretive among NFL circles. And I think Jason Light's going to try and build the strength of this defensive line with players like that. But they need to bring some serious attention to it. I don't think a flashy first-round pass rusher. I think there's some fine talent. That one guy at a Boston college, Easy E, we've been calling him on the podcast. Like, there are a lot of bona fide players coming out here in the first round. But as we saw with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, I know he was, basically a second-round pick, all things considered. But when you look at these edge rushers and even some of these defensive linemen, Yaya Diaby, really good rookie season, 7.5 sacks. He was able to bump up the pressure numbers in his second year, led the team in pressures. I think he was like top 5 among all NFL edge rushers in pressures last year, but only got 4.5 sacks. So all of these, statistics look great, and they prove that Yaya Diaby is developing into a great player. Kalijah Kancey leading the team in sacks isn't ideal, but it proves that he is developing into a very special player. All of those things taken into account, the Bucs still sucked at getting after the quarterback last year.
Yes.
And there were so many times where it's losing you football games because you can't get off of the field. You can't prevent 3rd and 12. You can't get off of the field for 15 plays, and the opponent, eats up 9.5, 10 minutes to start the third quarter of a game. There's just too many situations where you find yourself begging for more pressure on the quarterback. Todd Bowles and Jason Licht both addressed that at the combine as well. That needs to be their top priority on the defensive side of the ball. I think they have reached an impasse on the defensive side of the ball. They have a lot of talent, but I don't think they get over that hump unless they try to load up there as much as they possibly can. Because if you assume that Levante David retires, that's another huge hole at the linebacker position alongside a huge drop off at the edge rusher spot.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a recipe for success, but I don't know. I am a little hesitant about a going after a big name like a Myles Garrett or a Khalil Mack. Maybe that's just me talking scared, but I do think that this is a problem that can be addressed without mortgaging what you have to go and get a name like that.
Let me go ahead and convince you of this, Mr. Rhett Matthew of Cannon Fire Podcast. So why you go out and get a Myles Garrett? It's like the scene from Casino, one of my favorite movies, right? They're often all the guys, and they go, "Hey, this guy Jimmy, he's a really good guy." And they go, "You know what? Why take the chance? What are we taking the chance for? You just said it. It's tough for guys the first year to make that transition to become that impact that you want on that defense. You've already done this. You've already went down that road with the Yaya Diaby, who's shown some flashes of brilliance. And Todd Bowles, thought he should have had 15 sacks last year. And with the pressure rate, you should have had that. You have a JT West who hasn't been very good. You have a Noah Spence. Go out, get a veteran. The Bucs have done it before in their history. I get it. Jason Light is not privy to giving up 2 first-round picks, but Keyshawn Johnson, you give up 2 first-round picks. Would you do it over again? Of course you would, because he wins you a Super Bowl. You give up 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks to get a Jon Gruden. If this is your window and you get a guy who's 29, 30 years old, 7 consecutive double-digit sack seasons, you go out and get Myles Garrett. You do what Gerald McCoy said you do, because that is your consistent option. That's the guy that you have to go for, or Trey Hendrickson. Now, ESPN believes that Josh Sweat would be the guy that the Bucs would go for. In fact, he says, although the Bucs were surprising 11th in pass rush win rate, 41.7% this past season, they're probably losing several edge rushers to free agency, including Anthony Nelson, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and then Sweat. Sweat had 6 tackles, 3 quarterback hits, and 2.5 sacks. Also had 8 sacks during the regular season and 33 pressures. He will be 28 next season. Florida State guy, most likely, pass rushers, they don't grow on trees, so he's going to get paid a lot of money. Would you like a Josh Sweat, even though you may have to pay him $20 to $22 million in free agency?
That's the name that would be number 1 on my list, because of all the things that you would just mention there. 28 years old. That is a world of difference in an NFL pass rusher. Khalil Mack is the man. He will forever be the man. The only player in the NFL I've ever seen throw Tristan Wirfs around the way that he did in Chicago back in 2020. I don't think I've ever seen another lineman do that to our left tackle. With that being said, I think there is just so much more upside to bringing in a guy that can potentially stay here and continue to win here. You had brought up, that window, pounding the table for a playmaker. The Bucs have a lot of very talented guys. Vita Vea is the closest thing they have to a game wrecker. Yaya Diaby is developing into his own. Kalijah Kancey is developing into his own. Levante David isn't speeding up every year. He can be a game wrecker. Again, he can do all the things athletically he's been able to do for a decade, but he's not getting faster. He's not getting younger out there. And every year now, he's going to sign a 1-year contract and decide if this is going to be the last ride or not. You can't rely on that for 3, 4, 5 more years. So the Buccaneers have so many players in their prime right now that if you're one of those people who looks at building this team through the draft, which is a valid option. I mean, look at the star power that's already there. All the players that I just mentioned are Jason Light draft picks, even the guys on the offensive side of the ball. But Vita Vea wasn't what he was in his rookie year. Kalijah Kancey had some flashes, but he certainly wasn't what he is now in his rookie year. Yaya Diaby led the team in sacks with 7.5. He even had a hard time following that up his sophomore season. It's the question you ask yourself is, do I want to wait 2-3 years for these drafted players to develop and contribute while I'm wasting prime seasons of these other guys? Like Vita Vea is not going to be playing at this level 4 years from now. I don't think he will be. It would be great if he was, and it would be, a lot of longevity on his part. It would truly cement him as one of the best to do it, but I don't think he'll be at this level in 4 or 5 years.
I don't either.
Levante David, he will not be playing football in 4 or 5 years. If he is, it'll be amazing. It'll be record breaking. You know what I mean? I don't think we've ever quite seen anything like that. I know that some guys are getting up there in age, but you just have to start planning for the future. And when you have a lot of pieces on this team currently that make you say the Super Bowl window's open, this team is ready to win now, there's a lot of arrows pointing in that direction. I think you have to really put all your chips into the pile here if you're Jason Light. So I can agree with everyone pounding the table to go get that big, sexy free agent. I'm not necessarily against it. I think a name like Myles Garrett or Khalil Mack for the resources would end up being a mistake when you think about how long he's going to be here contributing. Josh Sweat is a much sexier name. I know there's a lot more paperwork that comes with that as well, and some cap gymnastics that you have to figure out, but that would be a worthwhile move. That would be a move that instantly allows you to get after the quarterback with 4 down linemen, something the Bucs haven't been able to do for the last 2 seasons. Todd Bowles isn't any stranger to mixing things up on the defensive line. He has tried all kinds of looks. He has tried all kinds of, disguising blitzes and showing these quarterbacks different defensive fronts. They can't get after the quarterback. So just bring in a guy, just bring in a dog, bring in a playmaker. They need a playmaker on the defensive line. I don't want to hear about the potential, because I'm bigger fans of these guys than anybody. Like, I'm a huge Kalijah Cansey fan. I got more Kalijah Cansey Prism autograph cards than I know what to do with. I got the whole rainbow collected over here. Diaby, all of these guys, I'm such big fans of these players, but we can't sit around here and pretend like they weren't partially responsible for this defensive line being as bad as it was last year. They need help, and they need a proven pass rusher. That, to me, is the only way that this Buccaneers pass rush gets over the hump. I feel like they're at an impasse, and unless they get aggressive and they go get themselves a dog, for lack of a better term, I think they're just going to continually run into these bumps in the road here.
I'm telling you right now, I think I've convinced you of Myles Garrett. That guy's a dog, and then think about it. He gets the opportunity to reunite, and it feels so good with Baker Mayfield. Who doesn't like that storyline? Rhett Matthew, thanks a lot for your time. Go ahead and promote yourself here on the Evolution.
One last thing. I do like Josh Sweat. He's number one. But if we're talking about pipe dream, big names, the perfect Buccaneer to me, the perfect Buccaneer, we say defensive end, but the perfect Buccaneer pass rusher to me is a guy like Max Crosby. Just 0 to 110 every single snap. He is trying to rip the head off of the quarterback every single play. He is consistent. He is inevitable sometimes. Even if the Raiders are what they are, he is a superstar. He is a freak athlete, and I think he's a guy that I would love. I would give anything to see Max Crosby in the red and pewter. Is it very likely? Not at all. It is not at all likely, but you never know. Never say never. Peter, thank you, man. I appreciate you letting me get on here and yap about the Buccaneers. This is, sometimes it can be a slow season. So it's always great to get on here and just chop it up with you. It's been far too long. You can find myself Instagram and Twitter at Retticus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. Also, check out the Cannon Fire Podcast for more Tampa Bay Buccaneer news and content. YouTube.com/Cannon Fire Podcast. Anywhere you download a podcast, Cannon Fire Podcast. And then last but not least, I got a new project that we just dropped a couple months ago called Video Americana. It is a lot of fun stuff, mini documentaries, restaurant features. I don't even really know yet, but we're just going to have some fun with it, and we're going to try and be creative. So all of that and then some. Peter, I want to say thank you again, man. It's always a pleasure catching up with you.
Absolutely. Don't be a stranger. We got free agency in just 9 days away, so you're more than welcome to come back next week here on the Evolution, my friend, okay?
Appreciate you, Pete. We'll stay in touch.
All right, sounds good. There you go. Rhett Matthew of the Cannon Fire Podcast.